It was a warm evening in the Sipsey Wilderness, about 6 years ago, when I found myself out there with my older brother. I was only 12 and he was 26. He had spent the last few years serving in the U.S. Army, most recently as a Green Beret. At the time, he was gearing up for his second deployment to the Middle East. The trip to the wilderness was his idea, a chance to spend some time together before he left for 9 months. We'd grown up in the outdoors, and this would be one of our last chances to be out there, just the two of us before he left. The first few days of the trip went smoothly. We hiked through dense woods, crossing streams, and camping under the stars. The rugged beauty of northern Alabama, with its deep forests and winding trails, felt like a different world. But on the third night, things started to take a turn. We were settled in camp, had eaten a hot meal, and were lounging by the fire. It wasn't quite dark yet, and the summer air was thick with the sound of insects and the smell of the woods. Around 8 p.m., 2 men walked up to our camp. They were in their late 20s, maybe early 30s, and looked like they'd been out in the wilderness for a while. Their clothes were worn and dirty, their hair greasy and unkempt. One of them had a scraggly beard. They asked if we'd seen any wild hogs while we were out hiking. My brother, ever the outdoorsman, nodded and mentioned that we'd spotted some earlier on our trip. They hung around for a bit, asking questions like how long we'd been out there, how long we were staying, and what else we had seen. I didn't like the way they looked at us. My gut told me something was off, even if my brother seemed unfazed. I remember one of the men kept looking around, almost like he was sizing us up. My brother called them good old boys. But even then, I felt uneasy. They eventually said goodbye and left, but the feeling didn't go away. I couldn't shake the idea that they were watching us, even after they disappeared down the trail. Later that night, as we lay in our tent trying to sleep, something woke me up. It was the sound of dogs barking in the distance. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the barking grew louder, closer. My heart started to race. I kicked my brother awake and asked if he had heard it too. He murmured, "I'm awake. They've been getting closer for a while now. Just stay still and don't make any noise." I was paralyzed with fear. I had always been a heavy sleeper, but the sound of those dogs made it impossible to relax. The barking echoed in the distance, the dogs clearly getting closer, and now I could hear voices. They were shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. My brother's voice broke the silence again. "They're just hunting for hogs. They use the dogs to pin them down, then they shoot them." That didn't help much. My brother tried to reassure me, but the fact that they were hunting at night, in the middle of nowhere, raised my anxiety. I lay there, trying to stay calm, my heart thudding in my chest. Hours passed. The barking continued, but it seemed to fade a little. My brother seemed more relaxed, but I couldn't shake the fear. Then, around 2 a.m., something happened that would forever change how I looked at the woods. I woke up to my brother's hand on my shoulder, shaking me gently but urgently. "Get up, put your shoes on, follow me, be quiet." His voice was low and serious. My heart started pounding again. I could still hear the dogs, now farther off, but they were still there. The voices had stopped, but I knew something wasn't right. I didn't question him. I knew better. I grabbed my shoes and slipped them on as quickly as I could. He led me out of the tent, and within seconds, we were sneaking through the woods. My brother moved with a quiet precision I couldn't even begin to replicate. We crawled up a small hill, just enough to get a good view of our camp below. The fire was still burning low, the glow casting long shadows across the ground. I could barely hear my own breath, but my brother was still as a stone, watching the camp. I was just starting to process what was happening when I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun's slide being racked. My stomach dropped. I looked over at my brother and he was holding his pistol, a HK-USP, with his finger off the trigger, watching the camp. His eyes never left the scene below. "Stay quiet," he whispered, and I nodded. My mind was racing. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew it couldn't be good. We waited, not moving a muscle, until I saw the shadows below shift. The figures of men appeared in the firelight. 5 men and a few dogs. They were carrying rifles or shotguns, their dogs barking and sniffing at the air. The men weren't talking loudly, but I could hear murmurs and a few indistinct words. They were circling the camp. I could feel my heart in my throat. My brother had told me that no one with good intentions would come into a camp at night like this, armed and with dogs. My brother whispered in my ear again, "If they come toward us, you run. As fast as you can. Don't stop, don't look back. Stay off the trail and look for the flashing lights." I had no idea what he meant by flashing lights, but I knew he wasn't messing around. He handed me a small flashlight with a red filter on it. "Keep the red filter on. It'll keep your night vision and make it harder for anyone to see you." I didn't want to leave my brother. I didn't want to run, but I trusted him, and when I looked at him, I could see the intensity in his eyes. I was terrified, but somehow I felt a rush of adrenaline, a sharp clarity. I could do this. We could survive this. I wasn't alone. The men below lingered for what seemed like forever. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, but I could feel them getting closer, the dogs still restless. My brother didn't move, not even a muscle. He kept his focus, watching them through the trees. The men shined flashlights around the camp, but they didn't come any closer. Every instinct in me screamed that we were being hunted. Then, without warning, they started shouting, "Where y'all at?" One of the men fired a shot into the woods, the sound echoing through the night, followed by more shots fired in random directions. My heart stopped. I could hear the crack of gunfire and the wild barking of the dogs. My brother dragged me down lower behind the crest of the hill. He threw himself over me, covering me with his body. We huddled there, frozen, as the gunshots rang out again. The men kept firing for a while, maybe 5 or 6 shots, but they didn't move any closer. They started walking back the way they came, their voices fading into the distance. My brother didn't let me move for a long time, just watching the path where the men had gone, making sure they weren't coming back. My heart was still racing, and I could feel the weight of my brother's body on top of me, holding me down, keeping me safe. Then, just as things started to settle, I saw it, the flashing lights through the trees. A siren wailed through the night, and my brother's hand squeezed mine. "It's them," he whispered. "The Forest Service is here." We didn't wait long before we heard the game warden truck's engine rumbling down the trail. My brother signaled them with the flashlight, and soon they were speeding off into the woods after the men who had terrorized us. We waited there, holding our breath, until we saw the flashing lights disappear into the distance. My brother stood up, helped me to my feet, and we quietly made our way back to our camp. The moment we got back, we packed up everything as fast as we could. There was no time to waste. The game warden came back for us after a short while and gave us a ride back to the staging area in the back of his truck. I was exhausted, scared, and overwhelmed by everything that had happened, but we were safe. On the ride back, my brother turned to me, a proud smile on his face. "You did good," he said. "You kept your head, even when things got crazy." I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to tell my parents. I knew they'd never let me go camping again if they knew what had happened. The whole night felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. But the most terrifying part was that we never found out exactly who those men were or what their intentions had been. They never came back, but the fear of them lingering in those woods stayed with me for a long time. The next day, we didn't talk about it much. My brother and I agreed that it was just best to move on. But I'd never forget the fear I felt that night, or the look in my brother's eyes as he kept us both safe. I learned a lot that night, but mostly, I learned that the woods can be unforgiving, and not everyone out there has good intentions. Back when I was in high school, I didn't think much of the consequences when it came to weekends spent out in the woods, hanging out with friends, and doing what we thought was harmless fun. A buddy of mine and I started dating a couple of girls from a nearby town. Let's call them Jamie and Katie. They were cool, down-to-earth girls, and their families lived in the kind of place that people only really talked about in the sort of stories where you end up being a part of the legend. You know, secluded country houses with acres of trees and creek beds that cut through the property. The kind of place where you can hear the rustling of the leaves even if there's barely a breeze. One of the girls, Jamie, had a cabin in the country. It wasn't the fanciest place, but it had character. A small porch with rocking chairs, and was surrounded by a thick forest that seemed to stretch on forever. It sat near a creek, which was always running, even when the weather was dry. We'd head out there on Friday and Saturday nights, sometimes with a cooler full of beer, sometimes just hanging out, telling stories and laughing way too loud. There wasn't a whole lot else to do in that area, so we made our own fun. The night I remember the most, though, was like any other until it wasn't. It started like any typical hangout. We'd been sitting on the porch, listening to the sounds of the forest, just relaxing and trying to avoid being caught by any of the parents. It was late, probably around 11 p.m., the kind of hour where the world starts to feel heavier and the sky goes dark enough that you can see every star. The faint sound of the creek trickling along in the background was the only noise besides our conversations. We were playing cards, maybe telling dumb stories, just messing around. Then, out of nowhere, we started hearing something. At first, it was a rustling sound from somewhere deeper in the trees. It didn't sound like animals, though. There was no quick rustle, no scurrying. It was more like something crashing through the underbrush, taking out branches, pushing through thick bushes. The trees were dense around the cabin, but not dense enough to block out any sounds. I didn't say anything at first, and neither did my buddy, but we both kind of glanced at each other, silently acknowledging that it wasn't just the wind. "Must be deer," I finally said, trying to sound casual. "They're probably moving through the brush." Jamie and Katie seemed unfazed. They weren't worried, so I figured I'd just ignore it too. We went back to what we were doing, drinking a little, joking around, but the sounds didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. It sounded like something was coming closer to the cabin, crashing through the trees in a way that didn't sound like any animal I knew. The noises were loud enough to make us all pause, our eyes darting toward the edge of the woods. Then came something worse. There was a sound, like something scraping along the side of the cabin. It was slow at first, almost like it was deliberate, this dragging sound scratching against the wood. My blood ran cold at that point. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or maybe a branch scraping against the house, but it didn't feel like that. The fog that had been rolling in across the field around the cabin started to thicken, and the air got heavier. The lights from the cabin porch seemed to dim with the haze that had rolled in, making everything look like a scene from one of those old creepy movies where something's always just out of sight. Jamie and Katie were still acting normal, laughing, chatting like they didn't hear it, but my buddy and I exchanged glances. We were both feeling the same thing, something wasn't right. My buddy stood up from the porch chair and made his way to the front door. Then he stood there for a second, looking out into the fog. I heard him mumble, "Maybe we should check it out," but there was no way I was going outside. Not with that scraping sound getting closer, like it was coming from the back of the cabin, moving slowly but relentlessly along the walls. We stayed frozen, not knowing what to do. A few more minutes passed, but the scraping continued, and the sound of branches snapping in the woods kept getting louder. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. Dead silence. Not even the creek made a noise anymore, which was odd in itself. The fog hung in the air thick enough to feel like you could cut it with a knife, and I swear the temperature had dropped a good 10 degrees in the last few minutes. We all just stood there, not really knowing what to say or do. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The forest had become too still, like everything was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Maybe we should head out of here," I suggested, my voice a little shaky. Everyone seemed to agree with me. We weren't all in the mood for whatever this was, and I think we just wanted to leave before anything else could happen. We piled into the truck and started down the narrow dirt road that wound through the woods, our tires kicking up the dust that mixed with the fog. The headlights cut through the mist, but the trees on either side of us felt like they were closing in. My buddy was driving, and we all sat in silence, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional sound of the tires on the gravel. It was about a mile from the cabin to the nearest paved road. We made it a little over halfway when we saw him. Someone walking down the road, moving slowly with no lights on. I thought at first it was just some guy out for a late-night walk, maybe a local. But as we got closer, it became clear this wasn't just some random guy. He wasn't moving like a normal person. His steps were slow and deliberate, almost unnatural, like he was in a trance or something. His eyes, God, his eyes, I don't think I'll ever forget them. They were wide open, staring ahead with this vacant look. It wasn't the kind of gaze someone has when they're lost in thought. It was more like the look of someone who had completely checked out of reality. I swear it was like he was staring through us, not even registering we were there. It was like he was on autopilot, walking straight down the middle of the road, never acknowledging us at all. My buddy slowed down and we all sat there, staring at this guy as we passed. The fog made everything feel surreal, and that strange stare was burned into my brain. As soon as we were past him, I think I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The tension in the truck lifted a little, but none of us said anything for a while. We didn't need to, there wasn't anything to say. The guy didn't react to us at all. No wave, no glance, nothing. Just that unsettling, 1,000-yard stare, and the slow, rhythmic pace that never wavered. We made it to the paved road and didn't stop until we were out of the woods. We didn't talk much, just focused on getting the hell away from there. The eerie feeling stayed with us long after we left, and I don't think any of us slept easy that night. In the weeks that followed, we tried to forget about that night, but it wasn't easy. That guy, the one with the 1,000-yard stare, never turned up in town, and none of us ever saw him again. We never really talked about that night again either. It was one of those things you don't want to bring up because you know it's not something that can easily be explained away. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence. Maybe he was just a guy out for a walk, caught in the fog and lost in thought. But deep down, we all knew that there was something off about that night. Something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, even now, years later. It was a typical midweek night at the campground. It was that perfect, quiet time when most of the families had packed up and gone home, leaving behind a few campers scattered across the park. The kind of night where you could hear every little rustle of the wind and the crunch of leaves beneath your boots. I had always enjoyed this peace, this solitude, and I was looking forward to a good night's sleep in the trailer. But, of course, nature had other plans for me that night. I woke up at about 2 a.m., the usual dull ache of a full bladder gnawing at me. My eyes opened reluctantly, trying to adjust to the darkness inside the trailer. The pale glow of the moon filtered through the windows, just enough for me to see the vague outlines of my surroundings. I let out a heavy sigh. I didn't want to get up, but the pressure was growing, and I knew if I didn't, I'd be miserable the rest of the night. The campground where we were staying had a comfort station near the back of the site. The washroom was a short walk through a small patch of woods that led directly to the lights of the facility. I had taken this shortcut countless times before, especially when it was late at night. It was quicker, and I was a little tired, so the thought of walking around the front of the site just felt unnecessary. Besides, it was a peaceful night, right? No reason to think anything could go wrong. I threw on a sweatshirt and a pair of shoes and slipped quietly out of the trailer. The cool night air hit me immediately, causing me to shiver slightly, but the brief discomfort didn't stop me from making my way down the trail. The woods felt calm, silent even, as I stepped lightly over the dirt and small twigs. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting shadows that swayed with the wind. I didn't mind it. It had always felt peaceful here, and I liked the solitude. It was far enough from the campground that I could be alone with my thoughts for a moment before heading back to sleep. But as I reached the middle of the trail, I heard something. It was so quiet at first that I almost thought it was nothing. A rustle, maybe a bird or a small animal in the bushes. But then it came again. A soft, high-pitched sound that seemed to come from right beside my ear. It was a giggle, faint but there. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the sound that startled me, but the placement of it. There was no one around. I didn't hear any footsteps, any twigs snapping, anything that would signal that a person was nearby. My first thought was a raccoon or some other animal making strange noises. Raccoons, especially, are known for their weird little giggles and squeals when they're rummaging through garbage. But this didn't feel like that. It sounded too human. I picked up my pace, hoping to make it to the lights of the comfort station quickly. I started scanning the woods around me, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever might be making that noise. There were no eyes glowing back at me from the underbrush, no movement that I could detect. I thought I must have been imagining things, or maybe it was just a raccoon after all. But then, just as I thought that, came a voice, a woman's voice, deep in the woods, clearly saying, "Hello." My blood ran cold. I froze. I can still hear it in my mind, that voice, low and slow, echoing through the trees, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a shout or a call for help, but the kind of hello someone might say if they were out in the woods alone in the middle of the night, unaware of who might be nearby. And the way it was said, it didn't sound like it was far away, it sounded close, too close. Without thinking, I sprinted. I didn't even look back, just ran as fast as I could toward the lights ahead. The trail was uneven, and my feet slipped over rocks and branches as I pushed forward. I heard the rustling behind me again, but I didn't dare slow down to check. My heart hammered in my chest, each step echoing in my ears. Then, as I was nearing the end of the trail, I tripped. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard, my shins scraping along the ground and my pant leg tearing. The pain shot through my leg, but I barely registered it. I was on my feet again in a flash, my breath coming in short gasps as I pushed myself faster, stumbling toward the comforting glow of the washroom lights. I made it there, finally, panting and sore, my heart still racing in my chest. I went straight into the comfort station, locking the door behind me. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My leg throbbed, and I winced as I touched the tear in my pants. I tried to calm myself down. I had to rationalize it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain had played a trick on me. I had been hearing things before, after all, hikers, animals, strange noises in the night. It was a remote campground. A little sound here and there wasn't unusual. But that voice, that giggling, I shook my head, trying to clear it. I tried to convince myself it was just a raccoon or some other animal. It was just a trick of the wind. The sound carried in an odd way through the trees. But even as I told myself this, I didn't believe it. I hadn't imagined that voice. I knew what I had heard. I did what I came there to do, though my thoughts were scattered, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was trying to shake off my fear, telling myself it was nothing. I'd make it back to the trailer and everything would be fine. It was just a weird noise, a fluke. But then, just as I stepped outside, I heard it again. This time, I was closer to the woods, walking back to the trailer, and I was taking the longer route, around the main road instead of through the woods. I wasn't stupid enough to go back down that trail after what I just experienced. The last thing I wanted was to pass by that entrance again. But as I got near the clearing, I could have sworn I heard a whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make my blood run cold. It said, "Come back." I didn't stop to think. My legs were already moving, sprinting again, heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The trees seemed to lean in, the shadows reaching out toward me, and I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't care if there was a person out there or if it was some kind of wild animal. My only concern was getting away from whatever was out there, whatever was calling to me, whatever it was that made my skin crawl. I ran all the way back to the trailer, the cold air stinging my face, my breath ragged as I pushed myself harder. I didn't care about the pain in my shin or the scratch on my leg anymore. All I cared about was being inside the trailer, safe and away from whatever was lurking out there. I locked the door behind me, and I stayed awake for the rest of the night, wide-eyed, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know if it was a person, some weird, eerie coincidence, or just my tired mind playing tricks on me, but it didn't feel right. It felt wrong, like I was being watched, or worse, followed. I didn't talk about it the next morning. I wasn't about to admit that I was scared. It felt stupid, and I didn't want anyone to laugh at me or think I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right with that night. I still don't know what it was, and maybe I never will. All I know is that I'll never take that shortcut again. Luckily, the following season, my family got a new trailer with an indoor bathroom, and I didn't have to worry about late-night trips to the comfort station anymore. But every now and then, when I think back to that night, I still get that eerie feeling. The feeling that something or someone was out there watching me, waiting for me to come back. And I never will. I was about 15 when this camping and canoe trip happened, which was a good 20 years ago now. I remember it clearly like it was yesterday, and even now it sends a chill down my spine when I think about it. It was supposed to be just another fun adventure with my dad, my two best friends, and their dads. We were used to camping together, but this time we were tackling a more advanced stretch of river, which had me excited and a little nervous at the same time. We had planned the trip for months, and it was supposed to be the ultimate experience. We had our gear, tents, sleeping bags, fishing rods, and a canoe that we were all going to take turns paddling. This wasn't a typical weekend getaway. This time, we decided to hire a local guide to help us navigate the more challenging part of the river. My dad thought it was a good idea since none of us had been through that section before, and we were all a little uncertain about the route. So when we met the guide, I was a bit surprised. He wasn't anything like the outdoorsy kind of guide you'd expect. He wasn't smiling or eager to give us advice like you'd expect from a professional. He was quiet, kind of gruff, and looked out of place in his worn, faded clothes and unkempt beard. But he said little, which didn't really faze me at first. In the beginning, he was just someone we were going to follow to show us the ropes, a person to help us get through some tougher areas. We started the trip with high spirits. The weather was good, and the river was clear and moving quickly. It was one of those perfect days. Sun shining, birds flying overhead, and the cool breeze drifting through the trees. We spent most of the day canoeing, each of us taking turns in pairs or solo, learning the best strokes, and working on our technique. My dad was teaching me a lot, showing me how to read the current, where to steer, and what to watch out for. Everything seemed perfect. By the end of the day, we were all pretty hungry. We managed to catch a few fish and had plans to cook them over a fire. There was something satisfying about catching your own food and cooking it on the open flame. The guide didn't seem too keen on joining us for our fish dinner, though. While we were all happily chatting about our day and eating, he pulled out a can of beanie weenies and a tin of canned fruit. It was strange to me. Everyone else was sharing stories about how their fish turned out or what we might do tomorrow, and the guide just kept to himself. We joked about it, asking if he ever got tired of canned food, but he just gave us a half smile and didn't say much. We were all a little puzzled but didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, the evening grew colder, and we all retreated to our tents. The guide wasn't far from our camp, in a small, separate tent, but as the night wore on and the temperature continued to drop, he came over to our group's tent. He knocked lightly, and I remember the sound of his breath fogging up the air as he spoke. He asked if he could sleep in our tent because he was cold and didn't want to risk freezing in the night. At first, I thought it was just because he hadn't brought the right gear for the cold, but my dad wasn't having it. He politely declined, citing the lack of space and saying that our small portable heater might not be enough to warm another person. I felt a little uncomfortable with the request, but it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. The guide left, grumbling under his breath. It felt a little weird, but again, nothing that raised any immediate alarm. That night, I remember being unable to sleep. The wind howled outside, and the heater in our tent did little to stop the cold air from creeping in through the gaps. I kept hearing the sound of someone moving around outside, but whenever I tried to peek through the tent flap, I saw nothing. It was the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like everything was too quiet. I don't know if it was the cold or just the strange feeling of the guide's request, but I kept my thoughts to myself. I tried to sleep, but something about that night had me on edge. I could feel it, even though I didn't know what it was. The next few days went by in a blur of canoeing and fishing, but my unease didn't quite go away. The guide kept to himself more and more, eating his canned food while we ate the fresh fish we caught. I kept wondering why he never joined in our meals or shared anything about himself. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like he was hiding something or just keeping his distance. Everything came to a head when we were packing up to leave. The guide was nowhere to be found. My dad and the other dads were packing up the gear, and we were all getting ready to head home. Just before we left, I overheard my dad speaking to the other fathers, his voice low and urgent. He was concerned about the guide. Something about him didn't sit right, and my dad was thinking it had been a mistake to trust him. I didn't know what to make of it, but a few weeks later, something happened that completely changed everything. 5 years later, I was sitting on the couch at home with my dad, watching the evening news. It was a quiet night, just the two of us. My best friends and their dads had moved away, and I hadn't seen them since our last camping trip. We were flipping through the channels when the local news station came on. It was a pretty routine broadcast until they showed a mugshot of a man being led away by police. The image of the man on the screen made my blood run cold. I froze, my stomach sinking. It was the guide, the same man who had spent days with us, paddling the river, eating his canned food, and keeping to himself. The same man who had slept in his own tent and then tried to sleep in ours on that cold night. The news anchor started speaking, but all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. They said that the man had been arrested after being on the run for years. He was wanted for crimes that made my skin crawl. He was a convicted child rapist, a man who had been living under a fake name, hiding in plain sight, and who had worked as a guide for several people over the years, all the while running from the law. I didn't know what to think. My mind went back to that night he had asked to sleep in our tent. I remember how he seemed so eager to be near us, but how my dad had brushed him off, never letting him in. I kept wondering if things could have turned out differently if my dad hadn't been so cautious. What if we had let him in? What if something had happened? My dad sat in silence as the story played out on the TV. He never said a word, but I could see the weight of it on his face. He didn't need to tell me that he had had his suspicions about the guide, but I think deep down he had always known something was off. It wasn't just the way the guide acted or the fact that he was so secretive. It was the way he made us feel uncomfortable, how he kept trying to get closer when we kept our distance. That evening, I finally understood why my dad had been so protective of us. I had never thought much about it back then, but now I could see the full picture. My dad wasn't just worried about a cold night or an extra body in our tent. He had seen something in that guide that none of us had recognized at the time. And it wasn't just about the cold or the fact that we were in the woods. It was something darker, something that none of us had been able to see or understand. I don't know why he chose to reveal himself to us or why he was so close to our group. But as the news broadcast continued and they detailed his capture, I realized that we had come so close to being in a much worse situation. The thought of what could have happened still haunts me to this day. The idea that we might have spent another night in his company, that we might have trusted him more, chills me. To this day, when I go camping or canoeing, I think back to that trip. I think about the man we called our guide and what he truly was. It's hard to imagine what could have happened if we hadn't been cautious, if we hadn't been careful. I'm just grateful that we never gave him the chance to get any closer. When I was a kid, summer camping trips were a big deal in our family. Every year, we would pack up the caravan, drive to some remote campsite, and spend the week surrounded by trees and fresh air. My sister and I loved it. There was something magical about the simple routine of waking up early, making breakfast over the campfire, and exploring the woods for hours. We had our usual setup with the caravan parked in a secluded spot, and our tent always pitched nearby for extra sleeping space. This one summer, though, something was different. My sister and I were both feeling a little rebellious. We didn't want to sleep in the caravan anymore. We were getting older, and we thought we were ready for the thrill of camping out in our own tent. I remember the excitement we felt when we convinced our parents. They were hesitant at first, but after some convincing, they finally agreed. We got to set up a small tent just in front of the caravan, about 10 feet away. It was a simple 2-person tent, nothing fancy. I still remember how small it felt inside, with just enough room for the two of us and our sleeping bags. It was supposed to be an adventure, something to tell our friends about when we got back home. But it quickly turned into something we couldn't explain. The first night was fine. We stayed up late, giggling and telling stories in our tiny tent. It felt safe with the caravan just behind us. My parents were inside the caravan, and we could hear them talking softly. The campfire had burned down to just a few embers, and the forest around us was quiet, the kind of peaceful quiet that comes with being miles away from the nearest town. But that peace didn't last long. Around midnight, when the air had grown cold and the fire had long since died, we started to hear something. It was faint at first, almost like a distant scratching or rubbing sound. At first, we thought it was just the wind or maybe an animal brushing against the tent, so we ignored it. But the noise kept coming, getting louder. It wasn't wind, and it wasn't the sound of trees creaking. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like something was actively moving around our tent. My sister and I froze, hearts pounding. I could feel my breath catch in my chest as the noise continued. It was coming from the side of the tent, where the ground was soft and covered in pine needles. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just a raccoon or some other animal poking around. But the longer we listened, the more it sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, as if someone was walking around our tent. I looked at my sister, her wide eyes staring back at me, her face pale in the dim light from the caravan. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. We both just lay there, frozen, not knowing what to do. The sound didn't stop. It was relentless, rubbing and scratching against the bottom of the tent, moving all around us. We could even hear the faint sound of something dragging across the fabric. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, the kind of fear that makes you feel like you can't breathe. It felt like hours had passed, but I'm sure it was only minutes. We whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening, but neither of us could come up with an explanation. We both knew that no animal could make those kinds of noises. It was too deliberate, too human. Finally, we couldn't take it anymore. My sister let out a sharp breath, and I think that's when we both realized we had to get out of the tent. We didn't know what was out there, but we couldn't stay in there another second. We started screaming, our voices high-pitched and frantic. "Mom! Dad!" I remember yelling, my voice cracking with fear. "Help!" The sound outside the tent stopped abruptly, but it was replaced by the faint crunch of footsteps. We could hear our parents moving inside the caravan, but there was no way for them to hear us over the noise. I don't know how long we screamed, but eventually, my dad opened the caravan door and came rushing over. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. We were both shaking, too scared to explain what we'd heard. My dad didn't waste time. He pulled open the tent flap and poked his head inside. "You two okay?" he asked, looking us over like he thought we were just being dramatic. "We heard something," I managed to stutter. "It was rubbing against the tent. It's still out there." My sister echoed me, her face flushed with fear. Dad didn't look convinced, but he gave us a comforting pat on the shoulder. "All right, let me take a look." He stepped out into the darkness, flashlight in hand, and started scanning the area around the tent. We stayed inside, both of us pressed against the fabric of the tent, watching him move in slow, measured steps. He shined the flashlight across the ground, around the edges of the tent, and into the trees. But there was nothing there, not a single animal, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. He came back after a few minutes, his expression relaxed, as though the tension had completely evaporated. "Nothing out there," he said. "Maybe it was a raccoon or something. We'll be fine. You can try again, or you can come back to the caravan." We didn't need to discuss it. Both of us grabbed our sleeping bags and climbed into the caravan without saying a word. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and confusion, but at least we were in the safety of the caravan. Whatever had been out there didn't seem like it was gone, but it was enough to make us want to never sleep in that tent again. Over the next couple of days, we didn't mention the incident again, but neither of us were willing to go near that tent. We spent our time exploring the woods or hanging around the caravan, avoiding it as if it held some kind of terrible secret. Then, on the fourth day, as my dad was packing up to leave, he started taking down the tent. He pulled out the pegs, folded the fabric, and began rolling it up when he stopped suddenly. There was a look of surprise on his face. My sister and I exchanged worried glances. "What's wrong?" I asked. My dad didn't answer right away. He just kept looking at the ground beneath the tent. Then he crouched down, running his hand along the soft earth. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "No wonder you two heard something." He stood up and motioned for us to come closer. "Look here," he said, pointing at the ground. There, beneath the tent, were small tunnels, little channels dug into the soft dirt. The more we looked, the clearer it became that the ground beneath us wasn't just soft. It was a network of burrows. The tunnels led all around the tent, and we realized they must have been created by some kind of animals. My dad poked around a little more, and that's when he found something else. A patch of fur, clumped together, like something had been dragging itself through the dirt. "Looks like some animals have been burrowing under your tent," my dad said, shaking his head. "Probably some kind of rodent or something." The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. That constant rubbing we heard, it was the animals digging their tunnels right under us. The scratching sound we thought was someone walking around the tent, it was just them burrowing and rubbing against the fabric as they moved. The dragging sound, probably just their bodies brushing against the bottom of the tent. It was almost funny in hindsight. The whole time we were scared out of our minds. It turned out to be nothing more than some furry little creatures tunneling beneath us. But at the time, we were terrified. I couldn't believe how my imagination had run wild, turning harmless animals into something much more sinister. We never slept in that tent again. The rest of the trip went by without incident, and we ended up laughing about it later, but there was always a part of me that couldn't shake that feeling of fear. The woods had a way of making things feel bigger, darker, and more threatening than they really were. It was a lesson I would never forget. Sometimes the scariest things in life are just the things we don't understand. Looking back now, I can see how ridiculous it all seems. But back then, it was a real, terrifying experience. I'll always remember the way the noise crept into the night, how my heart raced with fear, and how we both felt certain something was out there, watching us. It was an adventure, but one that taught me to always question what I can't see. I'm not one to jump into adventures without a little planning, but this weekend, my friend and I found ourselves doing just that. We had decided to head to North Georgia for a weekend camping trip. It was supposed to be a quiet, relaxing time away from the hustle, a chance to reconnect with nature. We had both been working nonstop, and this was the escape we needed. We packed our bags the night before, loaded up the car with enough gear to last the weekend, and headed out early in the morning, leaving behind the noise and stress of the city. The drive down was beautiful. Georgia's rolling hills, thick forests, and winding roads set the perfect backdrop for what should have been a peaceful weekend. As we made our way further into the backwoods, the trees seemed to get taller and denser, and the roads grew narrower, twisting around bends as if they were trying to hide the destinations ahead. There was something undeniably eerie about the isolation, but it was the kind of eerie that felt good, like being on the edge of the world. We stopped at a small, local grocery store to stock up on snacks and beer. The little shop was old, the kind you find in places where time seems to have slowed down, where everyone knows each other's names. I was at the counter with my items when my friend leaned over and whispered, "Hey, let's get some beers for tonight." I smiled, thinking it would be a great idea. A cold beer by the fire after a long hike sounded perfect. But as the cashier rang up our items, I noticed something strange when I asked, "Do you have any beer?" Her expression shifted, and she looked at me for a moment, almost as if she were considering how to answer. Then, she said flatly, "This is a dry county, hon. No alcohol sold here." I froze for a second. I had heard about dry counties, but I wasn't expecting to land in one. My friend laughed awkwardly. "Well, that's a bummer." But the cashier didn't seem concerned about our disappointment. She simply told us, "You can drive 10 minutes that way," and she pointed down a long, dusty road, "and you'll find a bar just across the county line. It's the only place around here that sells it." We were already pretty far off the beaten path, so we figured we might as well take a detour, grab a couple of beers, and then head to the campsite. We thanked the cashier, piled back into the car, and set off in the direction she had pointed out. As we drove, the The daylight began to fade, and the surroundings grew darker, the trees thickening around us like silent sentinels. The road was narrow, and the more we drove, the more I noticed how isolated it was. We passed nothing but woods and the occasional rundown house. The air had that heavy, still quality that only comes in places far from city lights. After about 10 minutes, we turned down a small gravel road, and as we rounded a curve, we saw a building up ahead, bathed in the dull light of a single bulb. It was an old, unmarked structure, with no signs to indicate what it was. We slowed the car and just stared at it for a few moments. The place looked strange. The windows were all bricked up, and the only light came from that single bulb over the door, which flickered as if it were struggling to stay on. There was no movement, no sound, not even a hum of life. It felt as though the whole world had gone silent. "Well, this is weird," my friend said. His voice was shaky, almost as if he was unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. We sat there in the car for a minute, unsure of what to do. "I don't know about this," I replied. "There's no sign, and the windows are bricked in. Looks like it's been abandoned for years." We joked nervously, talking about how it reminded us of scenes from movies like Deliverance, where strangers end up in places they shouldn't be. We laughed it off, but deep down, we both knew something wasn't right. We stayed in the car for another couple of minutes, debating whether to go inside. I don't know why, but we didn't feel comfortable. There was an unexplainable sense of wrongness that made us second-guess our decision. Finally, we just decided to leave it alone. "Maybe another time," I said, and my friend nodded, not needing to say anything more. We turned the car around and headed back toward the campsite. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something unsettling. The road was dark again, the trees closing in on us like they were trying to hide the world from view. We didn't talk much on the way back. The quiet was heavy, and I think we were both wondering the same thing. What was that place? The next day, we met a group of campers at the site. They seemed friendly enough, locals who had come up to enjoy the weekend, much like us. We got talking, and after a while, we casually mentioned the bar we had tried to find the night before. Their reactions were immediate. "That place is not a bar," one of the men said, shaking his head. "Never has been. I've lived around here all my life, and I've never seen a bar over there." Another person, a woman, chimed in, "You're lucky you didn't go inside. That place is known for trouble. People have gone missing around there. It's been abandoned for years, but some folks like to hang around it. I don't know what they're up to, but I'd stay away if I were you." We both looked at each other, shocked. They didn't seem like the kind of people to make up stories, and their serious expressions told me that they weren't joking. My friend's face was pale, and I could feel my stomach twist into a knot. "Do you mean like trouble as in people hang out there?" I asked, trying to make sense of what they were saying. "Yeah," the man replied, "but it's not just that. People get funny about that place. It's been there for decades, and nobody really talks about it. Some of the locals, well, they say it's better if you don't ask too many questions. Just steer clear, you know?" We sat there for a moment, the weight of their words sinking in. The whole thing felt wronger than ever. That building, no signs, no windows, wasn't just an abandoned bar. It was something more sinister. I thought back to last night, to that flickering light, to the way the place had felt as though it were waiting for us. I couldn't explain it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized we had narrowly avoided a bad situation. The thought of going inside, of stepping through that door, felt ridiculous now. What could have happened if we hadn't listened to that strange instinct that told us to drive away? The thought left a cold chill running down my spine. For the rest of the trip, we kept our distance. We stayed with the other campers, chatted with them about the best hiking spots and the local wildlife, and enjoyed our time in the woods. But every now and then, I'd look over at my friend, and I could see that same unsettled feeling in his eyes. The thought of what could have happened if we had decided to walk through that door stayed with us, like a shadow, following us even after we had left the area. When we packed up and headed back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting there for us. I don't know what it was, but I'm just glad we didn't find out. To this day, every time I hear someone mention that area of North Georgia, I get a tight knot in my stomach. That night, we were lucky, but it doesn't always work out that way. It was the day after a huge storm had rolled through the area. The wind had howled, and the rain had poured for hours. But by the time we were getting ready to leave, the skies had cleared up, and the sun was shining bright. My girlfriend and I had planned this trip for her birthday and our anniversary. Just the two of us, far away from everything. The campground we picked was about 5 hours away from home, secluded, and from what I had heard, nearly abandoned at the time. It seemed like the perfect escape from our busy lives, a chance to unwind and enjoy some quiet, uninterrupted time together. We left early, around dawn, hoping to get there with plenty of time to set up camp before the sun went down. The drive was smooth, the kind of calm ride where the only sounds were the tires humming along the highway and the occasional song on the radio. We didn't talk much. The anticipation of being alone in the woods, away from everything, was enough to keep us quiet. When we finally arrived, it felt surreal. The camp was so far out of the way, we had to drive for what felt like miles down narrow, winding roads. There was no one else there. The guy at the entrance said the entire campground was ours for the weekend. No other campers, no one else in sight. It felt like we had the whole place to ourselves, which we thought was amazing. It meant peace, quiet, and a complete escape. We pulled up to our designated spot, and the moment we got out of the car, we felt the isolation of the place. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the distant call of birds. It was so quiet, the kind of quiet that almost felt heavy. I could hear the crunch of my boots on the gravel road as I walked to the back of the car to start unloading our gear. The road leading to our campsite narrowed as we drove deeper into the woods, and I knew that getting out would be a hassle. There was only one way in and one way out, so we'd have to backtrack to leave. But it didn't matter. We were there for the weekend, and nothing seemed off. We set up our tent quickly, figuring we'd have plenty of time to explore before it got dark. After the tent was ready, we decided to walk around a bit to stretch our legs. We wandered into the woods, just the two of us, hand in hand, enjoying the peaceful silence. We had no destination in mind, just walking through the trees, listening to the wind and the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. It was beautiful out there, like a different world, the kind of quiet that makes you feel small and insignificant in the best way. But as we walked, we stumbled upon something strange. A cluster of white cabins in the middle of the woods. They were perfectly uniform, all built the same way, almost like a model village for people who wanted to live in the woods. It didn't look like any part of the campground we were supposed to be in. These cabins seemed isolated, as if they had been forgotten or abandoned. There were no signs of life, no smoke coming from chimneys, no noise, just an eerie silence. We lingered there for a moment, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Something about those cabins made my skin crawl. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew we shouldn't be there. It felt like we were intruding on something we weren't supposed to see, and for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Without saying much, we turned around and walked back toward our campsite. The air felt different now, more oppressive somehow. The silence in the woods had become almost suffocating. We didn't talk much on the way back. Both of us just lost in thought, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. It didn't feel right, but we didn't want to overthink it. Maybe it was just an old part of the camp that no one used anymore. Maybe we were just being paranoid. When we got back to the campsite, we decided to try and start a fire. Neither of us had any real camping experience, but we had everything we needed. Self-lighting logs from Walmart, lighter fluid, and a small fire pit. But after the storm, everything around us was soaked. The ground was still damp, and we struggled to find dry sticks or leaves to help get the fire going. We fumbled around, getting frustrated as the logs refused to light. After what felt like an eternity, we finally managed to get a small flame going. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, sitting on the ground around the fire. The sun was setting, and the dark was creeping in faster than we expected. The woods were silent again, and as I looked up at the stars, I realized just how dark it had become. There was no artificial light for miles. just the fire and the black sky above us. My girlfriend, who wasn't used to being out in the wilderness, was starting to look uneasy. "Can we get into the tent now?" she asked, her voice small. I agreed, and we put out the fire, crawled into the tent, and zipped it up for the night. We lay there in the dark, talking about random things, her work, my work, stupid little inside jokes. But I could tell something was off. She was tense, her breathing shallow, and I couldn't help but feel it too. Something was wrong, though I couldn't explain why. Suddenly, she put her hand over my mouth, her fingers cool against my lips. She was silent for a moment, and then whispered, "Shoo, do you hear that?" I held my breath and listened. At first, I couldn't make anything out, but then I heard it, footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps, like a group of people walking through the woods. It was impossible to ignore. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. There was no way anyone else was out there. The guy at the entrance had said we were the only ones. I whispered to her, trying to calm her down. "It's probably just animals or something." But then the footsteps stopped, and we heard something else. Mumbles, low voices, like someone was talking in the distance, but we couldn't make out the words. It wasn't like anything an animal would make. The voices were hushed, distorted, almost as if they were trying to keep their distance from us, but also trying to be heard. We both went completely still, staring at each other in the dark. The mumbling got louder, closer, and the footsteps came again, now right outside our tent. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. We just lay there in complete silence, waiting. Then everything stopped. The footsteps, the mumbling, the air seemed to freeze, and I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like hours. My mind raced, my body was frozen, and I couldn't move. The only thing I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Finally, my girlfriend whispered, her voice trembling, "We have to get to your car." Without thinking, I slipped out of the tent, trying to keep as quiet as possible. My heart was in my throat, and every instinct in me screamed to run. I looked back at her. "Stay behind me," I told her. We didn't say anything else. I grabbed the tent, yanked it up from the ground, and threw it over my shoulder like I was carrying a sack of potatoes. We didn't stop running until we were at the car. I slammed the door behind us and locked it without saying a word. "What the hell was that?" she screamed, her voice raw with fear. "We can't stay here. We can't stay here. And no one is out here but us." What was that? I didn't have an answer for her. I kept looking around, expecting to see someone, anyone, lurking in the shadows of the woods. But everything was quiet, too quiet. There were no other cars, no other tents, nothing, just the dark trees and the stillness of the night. I looked at her and said the only thing I could think of. "Okay, I'm gonna grab our stuff, stay in the car." I didn't want to go back out there, but I knew we couldn't leave without our gear. I grabbed the ice chest and tossed it into the back seat. As I turned around to get the tent, I heard it again. The footsteps. They were coming toward me, slowly but steadily, like someone was walking toward the car. In a panic, I yanked the tent out of the dirt, wrapped the tarp around it, and slung it over my shoulder, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't even say anything as I jumped into the car. I just asked her, "Do we have everything?" She nodded, wide-eyed, and I floored the gas pedal. The wheels screamed as I backed out of our camping spot, not caring if I hit anything. I was just focused on getting the hell out of there. We drove in silence for what felt like forever, until we came to a fork in the road. I had no idea which way to go. I asked her if she remembered the way we came in, but she didn't. We ended up on a different path, and I cursed under my breath as I slammed the car into reverse again. We turned around and kept driving, desperate to leave the place behind us. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spotted a small sign hidden behind an overgrown bush that pointed to the main road. I turned the car down that path, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. As we drove away, I saw it, a small green light glowing faintly out in the woods. It was right near our campsite. the exact spot where we had been. We didn't speak for the entire drive home. When we finally got back to our town, we crashed on her parents' couch at around 4 a.m. Neither of us said a word about the trip. We just slept, exhausted from the terror of the night. And to this day, we've never talked